Thank you. I'm a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and I'm showing my age, but my favorite cartoon strip has always been Peanuts. I don't know if any of you younger people remember Peanuts, but my favorite one is Snoopy sitting on his doghouse, and he's got his typewriter, and Linus walks by and says, "I understand you're writing a book on theology. I hope you have a good title, because a good title is really important." And he walks away, and Snoopy says, "I have the perfect title." And he types out, "Did you ever consider the possibility that you might be wrong?" And I like that because I think it's a very Lutheran position. Lutherans tend to be contrarians, and Luther himself was quite a contrarian. And that's why I like being Lutheran, but don't ask my wife about that, but that's fine. Lutherans were a 16th century reform movement, and when it comes to making decisions, we have a variety of things we kind of rely upon. The first thing we rely upon is the scriptures, which in our camp are the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. The second thing that we rely upon is reason, which includes tradition, but it also includes science and all of the academic studies. And I think this might get at one of the questions about how historically a church might be different today than it was then. Because I think our science has changed, our academic understanding has changed, and Lutherans like to talk about our faith informing our science and our science informing our faith. Another thing that we rely upon heavily is community. And I think that's important on this issue particularly because it's important that men and women understand that they are not alone, that they have a community of people that they can rely upon. And that community has responsibilities. I was thinking for several days about the tragic situation in West Dallas where there's 3 little children who were killed in a house fire because the mother left them alone. And I just wonder, well, how is that possible that there wasn't anybody that this woman could turn to or felt she could turn to? So among Lutherans, we talk a lot about the importance of community. And when we go about making decisions about ethical principles and ethical issues, we like to do it as a community. Now, our church, our national church body, produces social statements, and we have produced several of them on health care, health reform, and women's issues and abortion specifically. And those are advisory. They are not mandatory. In other words, when we promulgate those, it's not like this is the absolute one. That's why I like that Luther would have enjoyed, did you ever consider the possibility that you might be wrong? Because I think that that opens up the possibility for dialogue and conversation about all of these things. I thought another thing about our church is that we tend to be very pastoral in the sense that we like to look at every situation on its own merits and every situation on its own. And as pastors, we're trained to do that. I think about how I got into this situation of being involved with women's health issues particularly. I was a pastor in Philadelphia in the late 60s and early 70s. And at that time, nationally, abortions were illegal. And New York State had recently liberalized their abortion rules so that women were permitted to seek an abortion. And I became aware that there were women from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, traveling to New York for this purpose. But they were all women of means. They were all women who had the money to do that. And the women in my community didn't have that option. And I thought, that's not fair. And so for Lutherans, one of the first issues that we deal with is justice. The justice, how do we establish and create a healthcare system in this country that is just? And that not just includes abortion, it includes all kinds of things, and especially for women. Shortly after that, Roe v. Wade was the ruling of the I had since moved to Detroit, Michigan, and quickly became involved with a group called the Michigan Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights. But I also did some teaching at the medical school in Detroit. And one of the horrible things that I learned was that the health care in the mile radius around the medical school was some of the worst in the city. Now that was a grotesque irony. And so again, the issue of justice became important, but the issue of freedom also became a part of my concern. And I think Lutherans like to talk about that. We talk a great deal about freedom and the ability to choose. Because really, when you stop and think about it, without choice, it's very difficult to make an ethical decision. The polar opposite of choice is coercion. And so if you don't have choice, there's some coercion going on. Now, I do realize that choice needs to be regulated. That we don't, I mean, I'm not an anarchist, okay? I just don't want you to be afraid of that. So that I think choice needs to have limits, but those limits need to be as few as possible. And I think this is where the sense of community comes in. I think community really, really, really is important in how we go about making decisions. And that comes to the point of equality. For Lutherans, equality is very, 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 very important. And so that, I think that most Lutherans would say that there's an equality in men and women. Even though not all Lutherans, I think, would say that, but a lot of them would agree with me. But I think that that's really important. And that also has to do with the moral agency of women. I think we need to assert that women have the capacity and the wisdom and the knowledge and the ability to make decisions for themselves. That people like me don't have to make those decisions. I say me because it's clear still that aging white males like myself have far too much power in terms of making decisions about all different kinds of things, going to war being one of them, sadly. Justice, freedom, and equality, and community, I think, are the pillars upon which Lutherans look to make decisions. And that's too much, so I'll sit down.